Check. Yeah, there we go. All right, hey, how are we tonight? Good. Good to see you. Glad you're here. Glad to be here. Make sure I have everything I need. I think I do. Some updates, reminders of things going on and coming up in the life of our church. First one, this Sunday is the last Sunday of the month, and so that's when we do the Lord's Supper, and so come and be ready for that. I love getting to do that every month. Also, a reminder, right around the corner, November 1st, is the Women's Paint Party. If you've not signed up for that, I think there's still a handful of spots open, and so go ahead and sign up for that. Two other reminders of things. Man, actually, can you turn me down a little bit? I'm loud. That was pretty hot. Yeah. There you go. Okay, that's much better. Thank you. Two other things coming up. One, is Sue Rattery here tonight? No. There was a flyer in the foyer if you want the more specific details, but there's a ladies group called Juliet, and I can't remember what each letter stands for. No. Get me in trouble. Ladies group, we'll just call it ladies group for now. It's written out there. Regardless, they're meeting up here tomorrow, up in the youth room actually, and they're going to help put together, build the Christmas boxes for Operation Christmas Child. And so this year we're doing that again. We're going back to kind of just the old school style. We're going to present empty boxes for you, and then you can take it home and fill it and then bring them back, that sort of thing. So those are being prepared tomorrow. If you want to be a part of that, you can. They're meeting, I think, at 9:30. Check the flyer to be safe. And then Sunday, the empty boxes will be out and available for you to grab. There'll be a packing list inside, that sort of thing. And so that's coming up. It's that season. So looking forward to that. And then tonight's schedule is different. Tonight is my turn in the rotation to teach upstairs with the youth. And so I will teach us down here. And then when I'm done teaching, I'm going to have to hand off the prayer time to one of you fine, wonderful people. And y'all have done it enough with us. You kind of know how it goes. I got my prayer list up here, the two things that we'll focus on. I have the microphone. And so I just need someone to help run that part of the service. Does anyone feel comfortable running that last part, guiding the prayer part? Ronnie? Done. Okay, when we get to that, I'll hand it over to you. And then we'll pray just like normal. So, okay. Excellent. I don't think I have anything else announcement-wise. So let's get into our lesson. 1 Timothy 3. We'll be in verses 4. Do what? How hard is it to prepare? They come flat. And then so you have to build them out and fold them up and then present them. So it's not hard, but there's a ton of them. So yeah, why don't you come tomorrow and find out? Yeah. It's tedious more than anything, and there's a lot of them. So, yeah. Thank you for asking and for volunteering to help tomorrow, Scotty. All right, 1 Timothy 3. We're going to finish chapter 3. I'm in the wrong book. Where am I? Here we go. We're going to finish chapter 3 tonight, and then next week we'll start into chapter 4. And our passage tonight, which we'll get to in just a second, is kind of a transition, but I do want to give us kind of a bird's eye view of where we've been the last 2 chapters, or 3 really. So let's do it together, refresh together as a class. Who wrote this letter? The Apostle Paul did. Who is he writing it to? To Timothy. And who is Timothy to Paul? He was a mentee. He was a disciple of Paul. He was a spiritual son, but also a son in the ministry. And so Paul, we've said, is towards the end of his life and ministry, not at the tail end yet, but he sees it's coming. And so he recognizes he needs to raise up young men to carry on these ministries. And so Timothy and Titus are 2 really good examples of that. And he sent Timothy to Ephesus, where Paul had some history, where the gospel had gone, people had responded in faith, the church had grown. But in this particular season of life, there are a lot of issues. And so Paul positions Timothy there. He stations him there at the church, working with the Christians in Ephesus. And there's 2 main things that Paul is writing to Timothy about that he's wanting, that he's instructing and empowering Timothy to do and address in the church in Ephesus. Do you remember what they are? The 2 main ideas that he's dealing with. False teachers and their false teaching. So not just the content of what they're teaching. We want to make sure we're clear on that, but also how they live because of it. And then what was the other one? Restore order and unity to the church. The church, because of the false teaching and false teachers, both the content of what they're teaching, but also the way that they live their lives, had led to all sorts of dysfunction and disunity and chaos, and it was just a mess. It was a mess, and the people in the church were not being blessed. They were fighting and arguing and dividing themselves. They weren't bearing good witness in the community around them, and they weren't glorifying God. And so Paul sends Timothy there, and then he writes them this letter. And we said this is a personal letter because it's to Timothy, but it's not a private letter. That's why we have it today. So through Timothy, God is speaking to the people back then, but all God's people moving forward. And so a lot of what we've done is try to understand Timothy's immediate situation and original context, but also then we're pulling out principles and ideas of how this letter still speaks to us in our lives in our church today. So in the first chapter, Paul touches on the false teachers themselves, first and foremost, and the problems that they were causing, and just the bad character they had, and the bad behavior, that sort of thing. Touches a little bit on some of the false teaching itself, but the bigger issue was their character and behavior, and he calls Timothy to be different, to be set apart, as Paul is also different and set apart as a true teacher. And then chapter 2, Paul shifts his focus to address matters of worship and church order. So when you gather together for worship as the church, as the people of God, we want to make sure that it's not chaotic, that it's not dysfunctional. And there's some particular things that Paul mentions in chapter 2 for the men, for example. When you gather together, stop wasting everyone's time with all your little petty arguments and your power plays and all that kind of stuff. Instead, I want you to use your time and energy leading the people in prayer, lifting up holy hands in prayer. Set an example for your community, for your wives and your kids and the whole body of church, and prayer. Lead by example. And then for the women in particular, he kind of mentions two different things that we said absolutely were causing problems back then, but still speak to us today. One is how women were presenting themselves, how they were dressing. They were dressing in a way that was drawing attention to themselves and separating them, kind of being competitive against each other, drawing attention either to their wealth and their status or their beauty or both. And Paul says, stop wasting your time drawing attention to yourself in that way. Instead, he says, dress yourselves with holiness. Live in a way. Again, set an example for others. Make it clear through how you live that your life's not all about you, that your life is about the Lord and loving and serving others. And then separately, when you come together, there were some women that were being disruptive. And we don't know the exact details of what was going on, but at least one lady in particular, maybe more, had been so caught up in the false teaching, and then was either spreading that when they were in their worship time, or they just were kind of emboldened to do whatever they wanted, and it was disruptive and it was chaotic. And so Paul says, no, there needs to be structure and order, and women, you need to be quiet. You need to listen, and God has put leaders in place in the church to guide you. And so listen, and so that everyone might benefit, everyone might be blessed, and then you can move forward from there. And then about those leaders, chapter 3, Paul says, I have some instructions for those who would lead the church. And he has instructions for two main groups, two main offices. We say the elder, who's in charge, and then the deacons. And so we looked at both of those categories the last couple of weeks. And what we said was noteworthy. We went line by line, if you remember. But what was really noteworthy is it matters who your leaders are, and it matters if they're good leaders or not, but the qualifications that Paul puts here are not job descriptions so much as what? Character descriptions. He mentions one thing in particular that elders should be able to do, that's to teach the word, but other than that, the primary focus that Paul is looking for is not status, it's not wealth, it's not influence, it's not charisma, it's not any other number of things that might be fine, but what he's looking for and what the church should then look for is men of godly character. Men of godly character. And so he maps out what that looks like. And then same with the deacons, what that looks like. It's if you're going to be serving, then you need to have the right character. So it's not just about tasks, certain tasks that you do. It's about being a certain type of person within that community. And so Paul's telling Timothy so Timothy can establish that in the church so that the church can be blessed. And we've talked about, we all know and understand either from personal experience or just life experience, that if you have bad leaders in place, it can make a mess for everyone. But if you get good leaders in place, and when I say good, I mean people of character. Hopefully there's competence there, right? But if they don't have character, then they're going to make a mess of things for everyone. So Paul is reminding Timothy and the people, you need real leaders according to God's standards, not according to the world's standards. All right? So now tonight, we transition kind of out of those things, and we have, it's not filler though, which is really interesting. We got 3 verses, and in Paul's typical fashion, he packs so much into these 3 verses that we're just going to study them with the time that we have. And as Paul's transitioning out of one topic and moving into the next topic in chapter 4, he mentions some good reminders about what the church is, and then also he includes this really beautiful hymn or ancient song. So enough of that introduction. Let's read. Someone read out loud for us 1 Timothy 3, 14 through 16. Okay, thank you. So this section in these 3 verses, roughly 1 per verse, kind of have 3 main ideas that we're going to work through, and then these 2 break down into further ideas which we'll work through. But first and foremost, Paul pauses here. I mean, he's been really going at it for a couple chapters, pauses here, and said, what is his plan for Timothy? My plan is to come see you. Like, I'm on my way, I'm hoping, I'm trying to work out the travel details, but my hope is to show up in person. Why would that matter if Paul shows up in person? Who is Paul? So he's a hero and a mentor and a support and encouragement to Timothy, so Timothy's going to be blessed if Paul shows up. But also, chapter 1, verse 1, who is Paul? Is he just some random guy? He's an apostle. And who selected, who appointed, who chose, who sent, who equipped, who empowered Paul to be an apostle? Okay, so when Paul shows up, authority shows up, right? And we know Paul has the character to carry that well, but it matters when Paul's there. And in some cases, Paul shows up at a church carrying the authority that the Lord has given him, and people are in trouble, right? And he's going to set them right. It's going to be heavy. It's going to be a hard conversation, but a needed conversation. Other times, Paul shows up and people are just really, really excited. We've missed you so much. His letter to the Philippians. Remember, they loved him so much. They were desperate to see him again. Here, it's kind of a mixed bag. Paul had connections in Ephesus. He obviously loved Timothy. The church was obviously in a mess. And so Paul's hope and plan was to show up to help, to be a blessing, to strengthen Timothy, to set things in order, to answer any questions. You know what I mean? And so he's showing up as an apostle. He has authority, not just from experience, but from the Lord himself. But in the meantime, until I can get there, Paul says, I'm giving you this letter. I'm writing this letter to kind of fill the gap until I can get there. So what do you think that means? Why does that matter? What does that indicate? That Paul wants to get there. He's eventually going to try to find a way to get there. But in the meantime, I've got this letter for you. What's Paul indicating to Timothy? Okay, so these words matter? Yeah, what else? What does Paul think about the situation? Can it wait until he gets there? It's serious enough that it matters enough that Timothy, right now, you need to start addressing these things. Like, I'm aware of it, you're aware of it, everyone's aware of it. Start making some progress. I'm going to give you instructions to help you start making progress. The matter is serious enough that we can't put this off and just kind of hold together until I can show up and quote-unquote fix things. So that's part of it. By giving this to Timothy, before Paul even gets there, what does that show Timothy and others that Paul thinks about Timothy? That he's capable, that he doesn't have to wait for Paul to show up before he can start doing things. Paul has already given him authority, but more importantly than that, God has given Timothy authority, and I believe Paul is saying, Timothy, you can do this. You might feel in over your head, you might be young, and other people might look down on you for that. We'll talk about that later in the letter, but Paul says you can do it. And you should be doing it. And so I believe in you. I know you can do it. I'm coming. But in the meantime, you go ahead and get started. But then in the even bigger picture, what is so wonderful about this, that Paul didn't wait to just show up and do these things in person, that he sent a letter to Timothy, who gets blessed by it today. Now, do we think that's an accident? Or do we see God's hand at work through his Spirit To bless Timothy, absolutely. To bless that church in Ephesus, absolutely. But then to preserve these instructions as God's holy and authoritative word, not just in Ephesus way back when, but in all the churches moving forward, right? So we see Paul knows what he's doing, but more importantly, bigger picture, God knows what he's doing. So Paul is sending this letter. It mattered then, it matters today. And what was the point of the letter, does he say? 15, verse 15. If I delay, you may know what? Yeah, how you ought to behave, how you ought to conduct yourself. So again, these things matter. It's not just like a word of encouragement. It's not just like ironing out some theological details, these things or whatever. He says, no, I'm writing this because everyone needs to know how to live. The implication is it's so messed up that clearly they need this right now because they don't know what they're doing when they're coming together as God's people. So that's Paul's plan. I'm coming. In the meantime, you get started working on these things. You get started moving in this direction, and I'll catch up once I get there. But then he starts talking about the church, not just how the church behaves, but then he has this beautiful sentence, and he mentions three things. What does he say? Three things. How does he describe the church? Three different ways in verse 15. Okay. What else? Okay. So first, depending on your translation, says either the house or the household of God. Then he mentions the church as the church of who? Oh, there we go, the living God. And then what's the last one? The church is the what? All right, we'll get to all those variations there. But yeah, my translation says buttress. Wait for it. Oh, there it is. Hey, okay, I'm back. Oh, this is going to be harder to do. We can do it. Okay. Pillar, my translation said buttress before my microphone exploded. Others say foundation or base. We'll talk about what that means, but I'm just going to go with pillar and foundation. The pillar and foundation of what? Ooh, okay. So let's talk about each of these three things that Paul mentions here, because again, he says it almost in passing. But each of these phrases is so loaded in a good way. It's encouraging reminders, again, to Timothy, but also to the people back then about who they are as the church. Like what the design and the plan is, and because of that, how then they should be living their lives moving forward. So the first thing he says is, the church is the household of God. What might that indicate? What might that communicate about who the church is? Family, fellowship. What else does that bring to mind? Do what? Okay. Yeah, I like that. I hadn't considered that. If you're in someone else's house, you're a guest. Yeah, who's in charge of the house? The master of the house. In that society back then and still today, the father is often the lead figure of the house. So whose house are we in? More importantly, not because if we're not careful, if we just think house, we often think building. We're thinking household. So the people of God, the family of God. And so you guys already knocked on it. Very, very important. First and foremost, that reminds us of our relationships with each other and with God. So I don't know if they dealt with it in the same way that we do today, but my goodness, in our individualistic society, we kind of minimize our relationship, or we flatten our relationship with just between me and God. And that is a key element, isn't it? Our relationship with God individually absolutely matters, but what have we seen all throughout Scripture? And what does Jesus tell us? The two great commandments: love the Lord your God, and who else? Each other, right? And so when we are reminded that it's not just between us and God, but it's between us and God and us and each other, that these things go together, that starts putting things in proper context. So does it matter then how you treat your brothers and sisters?
Very much so. It matters. You don't get to just treat them however you want. And you need to remember that if you're family, that does not mean you always get along. Family fights, we know this. There's some dysfunction there, but you work through it. You're in this together. You're better together. And then big part of that, who are you responsible to at the end of the day? Not brother and sister. You're called to love and to serve and to work through things with brother and sister. But ultimately, you're responsible to the head of the household, who is God. So why might that have been needed back then? Why would they need to remember this? False teachers pulling them in all different directions. What were you saying? Same thing, yeah. Being pulled in different directions. George. Yeah. And again, I think a lot of them may have come from similar backgrounds, but there is a mix. There's a mix of people and a mix of backgrounds, and a mix of all sorts of things, which naturally tends to divide people. All right, we kind of group with people that we're like, or we have similarities with different backgrounds. Similar backgrounds or social status or social economic status or whatever. We divide ourselves out, and especially when people start fighting, we divide ourselves out over that. And Paul says, no, those divisions, you leave those at the door when you come in here, because you're in the household of God. You need to know who you are and who you belong to. God the Father and each other. This is what Christ has brought you into. This is what the Spirit of God is doing in your midst. All right? So that's the first thing. What's the second one? They are the church of the living God. What do you think that means? Yeah. The most straightforward, basic thing is our God is alive, as she said. He's not a piece of metal or a piece of wood. He's not an idol. Now, why would they need to hear that and be reminded of that? Or why might they rejoice in that back then? My goodness, yes, they were in the land of idols, as Steve said. They had this very famous, world famous temple to Artemis, the goddess Artemis, right? So, they lived in a society where idolatry wasn't just common, it was rampant. It's part of the air you breathed back then, incredibly common. But God had done what to people who used to worship idols? He had called them out of that lifestyle, right? He had called them out of the darkness. He had called them out of their lives of sin and brokenness and slavery to sin and brokenness and all their worship and all their pagan everything. He had called them out of that and brought them into his family. So Paul is saying, remember who you belong to, again, and who he is, that he's real, that he's the one true God, that he's the king of the universe. That this isn't just something we do culturally. Do we understand? A lot of them went to temples. It was cultural. Whether they believed in Artemis or not, it's just what you did, right? It was part of their business practices. We know it's part of the Roman Empire. There are some people who were true believers and really believed it, and then a whole lot of people just did it because that's just what you do, right? And Paul says, no, that's not how the life of faith works. It's not just doing it just because that's what you do. It's not just a routine. It's not just a cultural thing. We belong to the King of the universe, who is alive, who's active, who's powerful, who's authoritative, who is still taking dead people and bringing them to new life in Christ, right? The word church is taken from a Greek word that means gathering or assembly or congregation, but I love this. A literal translation means called out ones, and that's right in line with what Scripture says about how we've been called out of the darkness, called out of our brokenness, called out of the world so that we might come into a saving relationship with the King of the universe, the living God. Right. So we're the household of God. We have brothers and sisters that we are to love and care and support. And God is our Father. He sets the terms for how we live our lives. We are the called out ones. God has called all of us, whatever our background is. He's called us out of those things and placed us in his kingdom where he is very much ruling and reigning. He is alive. He's not a memory. He's not an idea. He is a living God that we are in relationship with, that we are responsible to. He is authoritative over us. One more quick comment here before we move on. Scripture makes it really, really clear that idols are not real, right? They're real in the sense that, I can touch it, I can feel it, and that comforts human beings. We like things that we can touch and feel and control. But Scripture says, how effective and powerful is an idol? It's useless. It's empty. It's worthless. And it cannot save you, right? Okay. But beyond that, what kind of real and meaningful relationship can you have with a piece of wood? I can dance all around this, right? I can burn incense, I can slaughter animals and sling blood and do all sorts of song and dance or whatever, but does it change anything? Am I going to really truly know and belong to this piece of wood? Is this piece of wood going to do anything for me? That was the hope, that if I do everything just right, if I control this thing, then I can control what it does for me. And it's all empty and it's all garbage and it gets you nowhere. But Christians don't play that game. We don't play games. Christians have a relationship with the King of the universe, the living God. He's alive, not just in the sense that he's active and powerful and authoritative. Absolutely, that's true. But he's active and powerful and authoritative in our lives. We belong to him. We relate to him. We respond to him. We are responsible to him. Do you see the difference? We're not just doing a bunch of things because there's a God somewhere. He's alive. No, like in our midst, our God is alive. He's at work. So it matters. It matters what we do when we're together. It matters what we believe and what we say about him. It matters how we live as a representation of him, because he's alive and he cares. And he holds us accountable. Okay, last one. Pillar and foundation, or pillar and buttress, or pillar and... Do you have anything else? What's your translation say? Base. I think one translation says base. Ground. Some of them say ground. Bulwark. Does anyone have bulwark? Okay, that's NRSV. Anyway, we get the idea. Even if we're not architects or have any construction experience, I'm neither of those things, we get the idea. What is the foundation? Let's go on. We'll go backwards. What does the foundation of a building do? Supports the whole structure. If you have a really beautiful, gorgeous, fantastic, expensive building with a bad foundation, how's that going to work for you long term? Not great. Do you remember? Gosh, it was years ago. I'm sure they fixed it. There was some big Texas high school football stadium. Was it Allen? Is anyone from Allen? Before I say anything negative about Allen? Okay. Yeah, it was like so super expensive stadium, and they found out like real quick, like, oh no, the foundation's messed up. And they're like, oh, but what do? They had to like spend all this extra money. Yeah, it's wild, because the foundation matters, and we know this in our homes. Foundation matters because it provides stability to the entire structure. Okay, what about a pillar or a column? What does it do? Similar. I'm not talking about the decorative ones, but ideally it holds the roof up. They can be load-bearing. They help, again, provide structure and stability and support for the whole building. And so if your foundation's wonky, you got trouble. If your pillars or columns or load-bearing walls, if they're not up to the task, what's going to happen to the roof? It's going to come crashing down. And so Paul is saying, and this actually plays out in a bunch of really fun ways I had not considered until today. The church, the people of God, are the pillar and foundation of truth. Now, in one sense, the truth, what truth are we talking about, by the way? The gospel. The truth about who God is and what he's doing through his son by his spirit, right? The truth matters. Who determines what is true and not? The living God. Okay. We don't get to pick and choose what is true. We don't get to determine. We don't get to make stuff up. We believe it as we receive it from him, and then we hold it up. So the truth of God, the truth of Scripture, the truth of the gospel provides stability and structure for our lives. That's true, absolutely. But that's not Paul's emphasis here. The emphasis is the other way around. The church is to provide stability and structure for the truth. What is he saying? It matters what we believe, and we need to proclaim what we believe. They were living in a society that had lots of different ideas about what is true or not. Does that sound familiar? Absolutely. That was needed back then, and it was needed today. In their own church community, false teachers had all sorts of different ideas of what they were communicating as true, and it was causing all sorts of mayhem and destruction to the church. And so Paul says, your job as God's people is to support the truth and to proclaim the truth. So protect and proclaim, if you want to think about it that way. One Bible scholar mentioned something that a pillar does is it lifts up the roof, keeps the roof up where you can see it and where it belongs. And so, again, in one sense, Christians are to live in such a way that we hold fast to the truth, that we support the truth. We don't let people attack or destroy the truth, but also we live in such a way that we hold up the truth so that people can see it. So in their day and age back then, Scott.
Also, the pillars of the building, the doors in between.
Yeah.
When you open the door to Jesus Christ, the pillars stand right there.
Sure, yeah. So it provides, structure for the building, and then people can enter into the building.
Jesus can enter into our
Sure, that's good. Yeah, so the truth of the gospel, as we are holding it fast and supporting it and holding it up high, people can enter into new life in Christ. Good, yeah. So we get the idea that he's communicating. If a church is operating and living and being who they're supposed to be, these things are going to be on display. They're going to treat each other like family. They're going to understand that they're not just going through the routine of just going through the motions of doing cultural little practices here and there. They're in a relationship with the living and reigning King of the universe, and they are going to care about the truth that God says, and they're going to seek to support and advance the truth of God. In their midst, absolutely, the truth matters. We got to be straight on what is good and right and true as God says it. We got to work this out. It's got to get false teaching out. But then beyond the church itself, inside, as they live their lives outside, are they living in such a way that they support and they proclaim the truth as God says it? That was their call back then. That's the call for us today, because there are people out there that have all sorts of ideas on what is true, right? I've been wrestling with, this is a side note to a side note, I've been thinking through, we know where we're going sermon-wise Sundays for the rest of the year, pretty much. But planning and kind of praying through what next year we're going to cover, kind of big topics or themes or series or whatever. And I was thinking about trying to find a helpful and meaningful way to do this, right? We live in a day and age where we can't assume that just because someone claims to be a Christian that they've got this right, you know? And I've seen people be real nasty and like bully with the truth, and I don't think that's what God calls us to, but I do think he does. I mean, I believe he's telling us that what we believe matters, and then we need to proclaim what we believe to the world that not just doesn't know it, but gets it so wrong it makes a mess of things. So I just throw that out there to ask you to be praying for me as I sort through kind of big picture sermon series next year, because I think we're going to do one on, I'm wrestling through where to put it in the year, on human sexuality, what relationships look like, some gender kind of things, because a lot of this stuff is swirling in our society, and not just our young people, but all people are hearing a lot of different ideas that are promoted as truth that are not the truth. And it's causing all sorts of mayhem and destruction. And so how can we as God's people say, no, this is the truth, and it's good, and it's beautiful. This is God's design, and this is what happens when we live according to God's design, and you can come be a part of it. So be praying for next year. All right, so household of God, church of the living God, pillar and foundation of truth. Again, Paul's writing to Timothy, who's in the midst of a church who had lost sight of this. And so Timothy's job is to tell him these things, but also live in such a way and provide, leadership in such a way that it reminds them of who they are and what God has called them to be, what God empowers them to be by his Spirit. All right, moving down now, Paul moves in verse 16 into, scholars aren't really decided on what Paul is quoting from, but it's very poetic and beautiful in the original Greek text. You can tell that the language has shifted, that this is a poem or a song or an early creed or something like that Paul is quoting from. And I think he puts it in there to remind them and stir them up into worship. But also it touches on what truth are we talking about? What truth really matters? And so let's talk about this truth that he puts there. Sue, did you read earlier? Will you read verse 16 again? Okay, thank you. So this has 6 lines to it. 4. And we're going to talk about each one and then talk about a way that I think They fit together, what Paul's doing. Because Paul's definitely up to something. But before we get there, he talks about this great mystery of godliness. Now, this mystery language is terminology that Paul uses in several of his letters. He's already used it earlier in chapter 3 when he talks about, verse 9? Yeah, deacons must hold the mystery of faith. He doesn't mean it in the sense of like a riddle of like, oh, no one knows. When he talks about the mystery, this is Ephesians 3, he uses the same language. He talks about how God has had a plan of redemption from the beginning. And it was not completely clear through the ages. You could tell he was up to something, but it is finally and fully now been revealed through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. So Christians, Jews and Gentiles alike, have been brought into the mystery of what God is up to. How he's making all things new, how he is saving souls and advancing his kingdom through Jesus Christ by his Spirit. So the mystery earlier of the faith is what we believe. It's kind of that's the nuance. But here, what little nuance does Paul bring out? It's the mystery of what? The gospel. My translation says the mystery of godliness. So I think what Paul is doing here, we can't separate them, and I think that's the point. It's not just about are we clear on what we believe is the gospel? Do we know in our heads what is the truth about Jesus? That absolutely matters. But that cannot just stay here in our heads where we know the right information. It then needs to start showing up where? In our lives. Yeah, from our head down into our heart and then out through our hands and feet through how we live. So the mystery of the gospel is something we need to be clear on. Do we know what's true? Good. Now, are you living in a way that's true? That's what Paul is reminding. They go together. But that's not even the big point. The big point is what he maps out here in these 6 lines. So line 1, he, who do you think he's talking about? Who's the he here? Who was manifested in the flesh? Jesus. What's that talking about? Not yet. Before he could be resurrected, he had to die. Before he had to die, he had to be what? Born. Thank you. Okay. Incarnation. Jesus. God, from eternity past, God the Son, became fully human. He was born, right? And so Paul, this is a song. It's a reminder of kind of like core Christian beliefs. So Jesus came to earth. He was born. He took on human flesh. John 1, he lived and dwelt and walked amongst us, right? So it reminds us who Jesus is and what he's done. He was born. Line 2, he was vindicated by the Spirit. What do you think that one means? That one's a little trickier. He was, what? Made known. Some of that. Yeah, Scott?
It says in Romans chapter 1, verse 4, and declared to be the Son of God with power according to the Spirit of holiness by the resurrection from the dead.
Good, yeah. So the Spirit was on display all throughout the life and ministry, death, and then resurrection of Jesus. So we see the Spirit of God working in and upon and through Jesus, confirming and affirming and reaffirming and reminding and then vindicating who he is and what he came to earth to do. Line 3, he was seen by angels. What do you think that means? Good, that's what I was going to say. Pretty straightforward. He was seen by angels, and so he was both human and divine. He was, well, the next line talks about the human side of it, but heavenly figures were fully aware and attentive and participating in his life and ministry. He was seen. He was on display. They saw him. They knew what he was up to and what he was doing as he lived and as he ministered, as he died, and then as he rose again. Line 4. He was proclaimed among the nations. What do you think that means? Do what? Yeah, who gets to know about who Jesus is and what he's done? Everyone. So it didn't stay within his small circle. It started there. And angels saw what was going on, but then it didn't stay there in small. This is Acts 1. Jesus says, go, you will be my witnesses where? Yeah, circles of context. Everywhere. The farmost reaches of the world, right? So who Jesus is and what he's done isn't going to stay local and private. It's going to explode all across the globe, and it has. Believed upon in the world. What does that mean? It's not just the message about Jesus went out. How did people respond all around the world? They came to faith. They responded in faith. And then ultimately he was taken up into glory. And that can play out two ways. One, after his death and resurrection, he tells the disciples, hey, you wait here. I'm sending you the Spirit. And then you're going to take my message all across the world. And then he ascended to the right hand of the Father. But also, Scripture tells us in Revelation, also Philippians 2, that a day is coming when everyone is going to see Christ for who he is. And everyone is going to bow before him and see him as the glorious King of the universe, right? Okay, so what we have here is good kind of bullet point, simple, memorable way to know the gospel story. But also we can categorize it kind of in three sections. I want to do this with the 2 minutes I have left. And this doesn't change what we believe about it or what it means, but it just helps us kind of understand the structure of what Paul is doing or what the early Christians were doing with this song. So the most compelling way I think of organizing it is this way. If we take these lines together, the first one, we could call it the revelation of Christ. In the sense that he was manifested in the flesh and vindicated by the Spirit. You see both the human and divine aspects of his life and ministry. Jesus is on display. Secondly, the witnesses of Christ, who got to see and attest to who he is and what he's done and what it means for him to be who he is. The witnesses. Did I spell that right? Yeah, well, these two lines tell you what witnesses: the angels and the nations. So the heavenly realm is aware of who Jesus is and what he's done, but then also it's spread all around the nations. So not just the Jewish people, but Gentiles as well are included in who gets to see Jesus for what he's done. And the last two are the reception of Christ, how people received him. Well, how all of creation will one day especially see him. So it says people responded in faith. They believed him all throughout the world, but also he was taken up in glory. He deserves all the acclaim and the power and authority that God has given him, and so people will see that. So bottom line, this song, this hymn is about who? Jesus. Why would Paul put that in here? I mean, we've been talking about women's roles in church, men's roles in church. We've been talking about elders, and we've been talking about deacons. We've been talking about false teachers. We've been talking about a lot of just heady and heavy stuff. Why on earth would Paul now switch into song? What is he doing? What's it really about? Why does it even matter what we say and what we do? Because he's real. And what he's done is real, and it has changed everything. He has brought us into a whole new way of living, a whole new story. So we get to this point, and even if we've been kind of bogged down with the other stuff, my goodness, our hearts and our souls start to sing because of what God is doing through Jesus Christ, his Son, by the power of his Spirit, right? This separates us from anyone and everyone else. Any and every other religion or organization or institution can benefit from clarity and good structure and proper order, right? Absolutely. But what makes the church different and so alive is what God has done through Jesus Christ by the power of his Spirit. So we get to not just remember this, but rejoice in this. Because even if we get all the other stuff wrong, and they were getting it wrong, we still get it wrong today, right? Even if we make a mess of things, God has already shown us what he's up to, how faithful he is, how he's making all things new through who? Oh, I erased it. Through Jesus, right? So that's what changes it. That's what makes this uplifting and empowering and so glorious, because we belong to Jesus Christ. Got it? Good. Okay. What questions or comments do y'all have tonight?
Jesus is the cornerstone.
Absolutely. He said Jesus is the cornerstone. Absolutely. Yes, sir. Scott.
You said, verse 15, you were talking about wood and idols.
Yeah.
Wooden idols. So, but now idol can't be a breathing, living thing?
It can.
Because, I was gonna say, is an idol a man-made thing, and a false god is living and breathing?
So yeah, that's like a bigger, fuller or discussion about how idolatry works. I just meant in the most simple way that they had like physical token idols as opposed to like the living God.
We have so many idols. We're the same now that we're.
Oh, sure, yeah, and we'll talk about that. I've been waiting. Yeah, I've been formulating a sermon about idolatry. But here's the thing. How much time do I have? All right, I got like 10 seconds. The thing about, pray for me. The thing about talking about idols is that when you start knocking on idols and knocking down idols, people get real mad, right? Because the issue with idolatry is where? It's here. That's the core issue. It manifests outwardly as we build these things and as we worship these things, whether it's physical or something else, sports or money or whatever, you know? But the real issue is you're messing with this, and it stirs up a whole lot of stuff that needs to be stirred up, but people get real mad if you mess with their idols, you know what I mean? So, but it matters. George, you had one last comment before I go?
Yes, I had to talk about the building block, the prophecy of Christ in Psalm chapter 118, speaking of which.
Say that again?
Speaking of, he's a cornerstone, Christ is cornerstone, it was prophesied in Psalm 118.
Oh, good. It was prophesied, he said, in the Psalms that Christ was going to be the cornerstone of what God was building, God's people who have the Spirit dwelling within them, Ephesians 2:22. Yeah, good. Okay. I'm going to pass it over to Steve. Nope, just kidding. Ronnie. Thank you, Steve. As a test, you passed. If you'll come lead us. Y'all are going to go over your prayer lists, and then Ronnie's going to lead you in prayer. Here's mine.
Okay,
You can use this just because it helps people here.
okay,
And then when you go to the prayer time,
Yeah.
there's always a prayer over the list, and then the second is a prayer for the
Okay.
lost. Can you help with music as always? Thank you.
okay, let's look at this list. Need a pencil.
Okay.
Yeah. Take notes.